All right, this is Kristen Stratt, and today is March 28th of 2012. I am interviewing Rori Carson. The interview is taking place at her office in Horben Hall in Macomb, Illinois. This interview is part of the Oral History Project for English 482, Life Writing, Spring 2012. Okay. Pretty much the first thing I wanted to start out with was, since we're on the tape, what years you attended the lab school, how long you were there.
Oh, I was there forever. I actually, I was 2 when my parents moved to Macomb, so I feel like I was pretty much raised here and everything else like that. And I attended preschool in what they used to call the old home ec preschool.
Yeah.
And that's in where the alumni house is right now.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved directly from preschool to kindergarten to the lab school and went all the way through and graduated from 12th grade there. So
you were there the whole time.
So whatever, I have to tell you, I'm not sure exactly what year I started, but I graduated in 70. Okay. And so, whatever 12 or 13 years before that would have been how long I was there. Yeah.
And so were you in Simpkins the whole time? Or?
No, I was in the lab school the majority of the time. And we moved to Horben Hall, which is where we are right now, when I think it was my sophomore year. I can remember carrying books down from the library. You know, if we had study halls, we were, recruited to do that, and that was kind of fun. But so then my junior and senior years were here in Horben.
Okay. So was it weird, like, switching from Simpkins?
Oh, I was we were excited at the time because it was a brand new building. It wasn't falling apart like it is now. But in hindsight, my favorite setting was in Simpkins. Yeah. And even to this day, it is not unusual for me to dream about starting school in August when it's time to start up schools and everything else like that. And I never dream about Horben Hall. I always dream about Simpkins. Yeah.
So it was kind of, looking back, that was what you liked seeing.
Well, it certainly made an impression on me, and I just have really fond memories of just even the whole structure of the building, what probably seems old and kind of quaint to people now that the English group is in Simpkins, to me was, well, first of all, I like old buildings, and even when I was younger, I liked old buildings, and that was just, it was just a fun building to be into. There were all kinds of nooks and crannies where people could kind of go and think that they were out of the way. They probably weren't, and there were just some interesting ways. It probably was challenging for for teachers and things like that, but for students it was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Little passageways here and stuff like that. So it was great.
What was probably your favorite if you're looking back, what was your favorite place in Simpkins?
There were a couple of places that I have really, really, I would say, good memories of, and a couple that I don't have such good memories of. My granddaughter calls me a nerd because I read so much, but I really always liked both of the libraries. There was the library, which I believe might be the Writing Center, and it actually had a door that opened into the auditorium, and not only did I love getting books from that library, and that was kind of the elementary, middle school library, and great conversations with the librarian who happens to still be alive right now, the last librarian in the elementary library. And I remember in the wintertime, they would have films in the auditorium after you ate lunch. And so you could go, and I remember like the Secret Garden. I don't know if you remember the Secret Garden and things like that. And they were, of course, the old classics. Now they'd be on Turner Classics Movies or whatever else. And then the library up on the top floor, which of course I don't know what it's used for now, but it also opened then into the study hall. And I have, the continuing love of the books. And that front stairwell going down the front was just a fantastic place. And we didn't have buses because we were private school. And the few times that my parents would pick me up, because they often made us walk home, was down those stairs, and it always felt so elegant and beautiful to go down those stairs. And they would put huge Christmas trees there in the winter that would almost rise to the ceiling. And, of course, they were decorated with things that kids had made in art and things like that. And it was just really so those. And then, of course, the gym. The gym was a place, and the band room. I was also in band and orchestra. But the gym was a place, of course, where we had lots of good basketball games and lots of competitions and things like that. And now it's that auditorium, so some not so fond memories would have come in places like the locker room, that went with the gym, and I just think it's always awkward when you're young and growing up to be in locker rooms. And I hated art. And I don't have fond memories of the art room, but I do have lots of memories of the art room. Plus my sister was very good, and I was always being compared to her in art, and that was not my forte, So,
oh my gosh, that's funny.
And that was down in the. You may already know this, but it was down in the west end on the first floor. The northwest side, whatever, and they may have totally redone that room, and I'm sure they have.
Yeah, probably.
So, but lots of really, really good memories, and there are other places that I talk about. We were always in awe of the elevator, because of course we weren't allowed to ride it. That was for faculty only, again, some of those nooks and crannies, practice rooms with the music room, the mat room for the PE, those types of things.
So you were on probably every level,
absolutely, right? Every level. Not in every room.
Right.
Especially because we had 2 kindergartens and 2 first grades and everything else like that. So I was not in the same ones that, ironically, my sister was in. And so I remember being in those rooms, but then when you started going further into more, classes that changed and everything else like that, we tended to be in every room. So,
because it went up by each level was different, on the middle school.
Yeah, the bottom floor was primarily kindergarten and first grade, but it also had the nurse's office. We had a full-time nurse, which is very atypical nowadays in school, and it also had the art area and the music areas. And our school had band, chorus, and orchestra, so we had all 3. And then had a lunchroom down there, and a big room that was also very intriguing to little kids underneath the stairs that came out on that first floor, that was where the janitors gathered and things like that. And then the faculty lounge was down there too. And then the second floor was second, third, and possibly 4th grade, and the third floor was 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. 5th may have also been on the second floor. I had 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. I can remember. I remember 5th grade being on the 3rd floor, and 6th and 7th grade. And I can't remember as much about 8th grade classes. I think they were probably there too. And then the 9th through 12th was up on the upper floor. And of course it was very small. We only had 200 kids in our high school when I went to school there.
How many were in your class?
42 graduated in our class. And most everybody tended to graduate from that school. But so we actually had a smaller class than some of the others, but most of them were around the 50, give or take 10 kids or whatever else. We had 13 girls in my class.
Wow.
And the rest of them were boys, so it was kind of
everyone probably knew each other.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, even to this day, we still have Western High reunions, and we go across years because, of course, there are so few of us still around. But every Heritage Days, we have reunions that we get together. So,
do you remember, did you have teachers come, students?
Yes. Yeah, students coming to do observations and to do some student teaching and things like that all the time. And I even have some pictures at home that some of the students took of me over in front of Tillman, those stairs that went down into Tillman or whatever else. I think that I must have been in second or third grade. The other thing that was really interesting about being there, besides the fact that they tried lots of cutting-edge techniques like the new math or the SRA reading, those were big things, when I was growing up, was it seemed like we took every test in the book. I actually learned to become a really, really good test taker because, and I think it was because students were practicing their skills on giving tests, especially maybe counselor education students or school psychology students or stuff like that. I remember my folks knew my IQ very early on, but of course you never know whether it was accurate or not because it probably was a student, practicing on us or things like that. But it seemed like we were guinea pigs all the time, although it was normal to us, so we really didn't think anything about it,
Did you like them? Did you ever have a teacher where you were like?
Oh, of course we had, depending upon what age we were, there were some, there was all, as you got older, of course, there was less and less age difference between you and college students and everything else like that. And so there were the crushes on the cute guys and, and things like that. But for the most part, it was just SOP. It was just standard operating procedure. But it also provided a lot of, they would come with really exciting things to do. They were nervous but very enthusiastic, and of course we didn't think of them as students at the time. When you think back about it, you realize what it was. But that was just the way our life always was, and we always had tons of people around, and we just thought that was the way schooling was.
Having people observe you was not.
Oh, no. Having people sit in the back of the room was the norm rather than the exception. And there used to be a class, it's 201 now, EIS 201, that used to have an observation component to it. They've since kind of not had kind of dropped that out of the curriculum, and people were taught how to do good observation techniques, and then they would do reports, and oftentimes it would come home to our parents, so they would hear about stuff that you maybe didn't want them to hear about, or things like that. But it was, in hindsight. Well, I remember one time when I was a senior. Or in high school, and somebody was calling it the gifted school. And it was a shock to me because I just thought it was just like every other school. And of course there was lots of rivalry between Western and other schools in the region because they were smaller and oftentimes they had better teams. Well, later I learned that our coaches would go out and recruit because people could come even from surrounding communities. So if they were good football players or good basketball players, they would recruit their parents to bring them to Western. But at the time I was never aware of that. It just, you just thought that they chose to come. You didn't realize that maybe somebody had gone out and encouraged them to come.
Did Macomb have a high school? When you, Did you ever interact with them?
Especially as we got older, and there were, as I said, lots of lots of rivalries. And later in my career, when I became a teacher, I actually taught at Macomb High. And it was a huge adjustment for me to have to wear their colors after hating them for so long.
Yeah.
Quote, hating them, or thinking I hated them. Yeah. Well, you know how rivalries are, and everything else like that. And just to become a Macomb High bomber was just really a challenge for me, and to wear that ugly orange in comparison, and stuff like that. And now, of course, I'm very happy that I spent that time. That was a really good experience for me. But
looking back, do you now that you're kind of involved in education stuff? Looking back, do you think going to the lab school really helped you?
I think that it was a wonderful school for that time period, I think that I had opportunities and encouragements, and of course I grew up at a time where it was the front end of. I graduated at the front end of women's liberation type movements and things like that. So we didn't have women's sports when I was in high school. We had Girls Athletic Association, and stuff. And there was no Title whatever 7 or 9 or whichever is the equality that came when I was in college, and everything else like that. But there was much more equality, I think, and we were treated much more equally, and we were really led to believe that we could do anything, and supported in attempting to do things like that. The graduates that I went to school with they do a diverse number of things. The one that I am aware of right now, many became teachers themselves. But many of them became professors and doctors and lawyers and things like that. For a class of 42, it was an amazingly prolific class. And we weren't the only ones. That was the norm. That was the norm. There never was a question about whether we would go on to school. It's always kind of come as a shock to me, the numbers of people who don't go on to school, because I always thought everybody did. Right. So I think that we were privileged, and knowing now that was at taxpayer expense, and that people typically don't. Well, big programs like Western's program, actually, a lab school would not make a substantial contribution to the teacher ed program now as it did back at that time. So yeah, I thought it was wonderful at that time. Of course, now if we want to have relationships, we want to have them with real schools, with real school problems and everything else like that. But in our case, all of our faculty members were professors at the university. They were considered, many of them have their doctorate, which is very atypical in a lot of schools. And they certainly were proud of the fact, and they had to remain current in best practice because they had so many students coming in and evaluating and kind of giving them feedback and everything else like that. So,
do you have any teachers that you remember really impacting you, or any school subjects that were your absolute favorite?
Well, no wonder my granddaughter calls me a nerd. I really like school, and I really liked. I liked all subject matters. I really enjoyed math and science, but as I was just talking about, I was raised in an age where women weren't as involved in math and science. I never really considered math and science, but then my father was a professor, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and so the only thing I had really seen was a teacher, and so to me it was just really logical. Both my sister and I became teachers. My brother became a pharmacist, and but in terms of I just love them all, and I took very advanced courses, the programs that they're talking about now, like 4 years of math and everything. That was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
I would have, well, I actually ended up getting pregnant and having my son my senior year, and so I actually graduated a semester early. But it wouldn't have been something I would have chosen to do because I liked school too much.
Right.
I was enjoying school. As it turned out, I went on to college then, immediately. So I didn't have much of a break in between the two of them or anything else like that. So, but yes, there are teachers we still laugh about. Some of them. Some of them are actually still around here, believe it or not.
Really?
Dr. Kellogg, who was a science individual, taught in the curriculum and instruction department for many, many years. He's retired now, but I still see him regularly. He just recently moved into the Wesley older home for older people and everything else like that. But they have a science conference here every year in his name, and he always comes back and participates and helps give awards for things like that. Miss, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on her name, the librarian that I was telling you about. She I haven't seen her so much recently, but when I first came back to Western in 2006, she was out frequently and would come to the alumni tent and everything else like that. I know there still are a coach that I really was, rude to know and everything else like that. And I'm sure there are others still around besides those. We kind of have a, it's not a blog, but a listserv, and when people pass, if we find out about it, we tend to do those out. I have lots of memories of different teachers. Some of them were not as good of memories as others, but I think that's pretty typical, And I was kind of a strong-willed student, so I'm sure that I was a challenging student to some teachers, and I think their responses to me reflected that. I always got accused of hearing my voice clear down the hallway, even when I would purposefully not say anything while they were gone, because I had a rep,
Oh my gosh. So I looked in your yearbook, and it says you were. It didn't really list how many years you were in things, but it kind of like your senior year, it kind of lists your credits. So I was kind of wondering which of the activities you were involved in, the longest.
I was. My sister was yearbook editor for a while, so I stayed out of that. I don't know if you had an older sister, but I tended to oftentimes choose to not follow in her footsteps just because I didn't want to be compared with her all the time. I don't think that was conscious, but in hindsight, I think that I probably... So she was a cheerleader, and she was on the yearbook, and so I stayed away from that. I was really actively involved in all of the musical things, all of the time that I was at school, the band, orchestra, and chorus types of stuff. I was pretty actively engaged in student council quite a number of years. I don't remember whether I was during my senior year. Remember, that was the year that I had my son. And so, again, kind of relative to the changes in women's stuff, there was kind of a feeling that others should have those opportunities if I was pregnant, although I went to school and everything else like that during the first semester. Lots of those committees, because of student council, the homecoming committee and things like that. In fact, I'm somewhat fuzzy on this, but I remember, I think I was an officer a couple of years, never the president of student council, but like the vice president or a secretary or something like that. And involved with the class leadership, those types of things too. And I'm trying to remember different clubs that I would have been involved with. I'm sure I was. I mean, we were always busy, but...
Your yearbook said you were in, pep club, Spanish club.
Yeah, those types of things.
And then it said you were in Tri-Mu.
That would have been an academic honor society or something like that. Yeah, that would have been an academic honor society or something else like that. And I also then began taking university level classes. That was one of the nice things about going to school here. We could take university level classes while we were in, I don't remember it so much in my junior year, but I must have taken it the first semester of my senior year, because those were some of the credits that I used to graduate early. I had originally intended to use those credits as university level credits, because I had enough credits. I would have had enough credits if I'd come that last semester, but then I transferred them to the high school and used them to graduate. And that was kind of cool too, to be, to be really be a high school student, but to be in those freshman and sophomore level gen ed courses, psychology, sociology, some of those types of.
Did you go to the to Western?
And then I went. Some people say if they'd had a doctoral program when I would have been here, I would have done that here too. But I earned my bachelor's and master's here, so I went on to school here. So.
That's cool.
So, actually, I got a very good education when I earned my bachelor's and master's, too. It contributed to me being able to go earn my doctorate at a Big Ten university, which I thought was, nice, solid foundation and everything. So,
that's cool.
Yeah, so.
Do you have, what was probably, your favorite activity that you were involved in out of, band, orchestra, and the clubs? What stands out in your mind, I guess, if there is one?
I just really enjoyed being involved with people. I wasn't a particularly talented. I played the French horn. I was in marching band, and both band and orchestra. I played the French horn. But I wasn't particularly talented, and I was in chorus. I loved chorus, but I don't think that I had a good voice. I think that I was one of those people who was a part of the group, but not certainly not the star in any stretch of the imagination. I actually enjoyed everything that I did.
Yeah.
I felt like I was pretty actively engaged, but in hindsight, what I would have to say is that I was kind of socially protected. My husband, who went to Colchester High School, in high school, and we didn't go together in high school, so we met after that. Often makes fun of the things I didn't do when I was high school, and a lot of it has to do with what I would kind of call being a bit of a troublemaker in the community, and apparently he had some of those experiences. And I would have never even thought about that. I came to school events, I did school things. If I went out, I went to the show, and then maybe out to get, a sandwich afterwards or stuff like that. So
all kind of revolving around school activities.
Pretty much around school. It was a big part of our life. And then we did university things too, because my dad was a coach here, so we would go to university games and things like that. So.
Yeah.
So I just remember lots of sporting activities, because for a small school, we did everything, so you went to all the football games, you went to all the basketball games, when you were younger, you went to both the JV and the varsity. I played in the pep band, so I had to, to be in those things and stuff like that. So.
Do you think that, going to the smaller school was kind of, the reason why it was just normal to go to all these, because I feel like bigger schools, they don't always really get the students involved as much.
I think there were the small school definitely contributed to that. But the other thing that I think contributed to that was that we did have a lot of opportunities. I know that a lot of small schools nowadays struggle with having the finances to man, say, a football program. In fact, as I told you, my husband went to Colchester, and even back then, which was he graduated in 68 or 69, even back then, they didn't have enough money to have a football program, so they didn't even have football, and so not only were we smaller, but we still had all the same opportunities that a big school had, and And so in order to man them and have an audience, everybody participated,
Right.
you know. And I never really thought about that, but in hindsight, I'm certain that, you know, the synergy, the involvement level, not just of me, but of the majority of the people in the school, was pretty high.
Right. You think it kind of like the lab school got a lot of advantages being like so close to like
Absolutely.
a university?
Absolutely, and being state supported as opposed to being supported by local taxes. And that was a big shock to me when I went out and started working in the public schools, the kind of challenges they had.
Right.
And of course I didn't pay much attention to that when I was in school either, but we, I think, had top quality everything. Things that even our university now doesn't have for those comparable things for university students. I mean, we never wanted for athletic equipment or band equipment or you know, an orchestra. A lot of places didn't even have an orchestra, you know, and things like that. So in hindsight, I'm sure that it was because we were supposed to be a model, you know, and so in order to be a model, you have to have the stuff to do that with. But at the time, of course, I was totally unaware of that, you know. So
it was just normal.
It was just normal to me. It was just, I mean, you just didn't even think anything about it. So
that kind of like going along, like since you guys were so close to the university, you've got the opportunity to go and take college credit. Did like lots of people take advantage of that
I would say
opportunity?
I would say that probably more than would be typical in a regular school. You know, I don't know that it was lots. I think I was a little atypical, but as I told you, I was a really good student, you know, and not only that, I really liked it. I didn't, you know, some people are good students, but they could care less, you know, and I just really enjoyed learning. Still do, you know, so, but yeah, that was fantastic, and to go directly into a university classroom, not even to have to go to a community college or something else like that. I know there are some, you know, there are some schools now that have relationships with their community colleges, but so I don't remember that dozens of us did it, but I'm not sure that I paid real close attention to that either, you know, so it might have been more than what I remembered.
Do you remember, like, what it was like being around, like, because you were in such a close proximity to all these, like, college students, like...
Yeah. You know, it's funny because, I was telling you about that dream, but some of my memories, we lived on Calhoun Street, if you know where Calhoun Street is, and it was kind of a little bit towards town. And so I can remember walking home regularly, and of course we were always amongst college students or professors at that point in time. So I also still dream of Sherman Hall, even though I actually did have some of my undergraduate classes there. But things like, are you aware? I'm assuming you're aware that there's a tunnel between Sherman Hall and Simpkins. Well, when I was growing up, that was open. And so we would walk through that tunnel in kind of inclement weather, and also because it was even scary at that point. You know, they'd had banging pipes and, you know, asbestos on the pipes wrapped around them and everything else like that. I know they don't let people down there. I think they store some stuff down there now, but. And I can remember, you know, that outline around Sherman Hall. I can remember getting up where those balls are. I walked on that as much as I walked. There used to be a sidewalk next to that went all the way around. So we would walk with that. But you know, there were some buildings here at that point in time that are not here any longer. My dad worked in the old Morgan Gym, which has burned down. I remember when it burnt down, it was over Thanksgiving week, and I remember him loading us in the car in our pajamas, and we all went and watched this building, you know, burning down. Of course, that was where his office was, and everything else like that. I remember university football games. So we we really had, and part of it was also because my dad worked here, but we had lots of interactions with the university community. We were part of the university community. And I think the Lab School was perceived as part of the university community.
Right.
Corbin and Olson, I have very vague memories. Believe it or not, here they are renovating them.
Yeah.
But I can remember almost every dorm on this campus being built. The Corbin and Olson, in what used to sit there beforehand was housing that they used as married student housing, and they were Quonset huts from World War II. And actually, I had a friend who lived in one of those with his family or whatever else. The house at the end of Murray Street, the west end of Murray Street, it's kind of used to be yellow. It's kind of a quaint little house. Used to sit where the Union was, and I can remember them moving that house because it was the first time I'd ever seen a house moved. I didn't know you could move houses, you know. And then they built the Union. Well, I can remember all of those buildings being built because where Q-Lot and Wetzel and Bayless and Henninger used to be. We used to live at the end of North Charles at that house up at the top of the end of North Charles.
Really?
And back there where Bayless and Henninger used to be were cattle barns for the farm, for the university farm was there. And we used to go over and play in their cattle barns. And this is really funny. People used to park back behind. There used to be kind of a cinder road back there. And people used to come and park back behind our house. And, of course, we could stand in my sister's bedroom and laugh about, you know, as children will do, you know, laugh about these people back parked behind. I remember when they built the original University Drive, there was never any drive back there or anything else like that. And I'm really too young to remember all of these things because I'm really not as old as I look like, you know. But those, you know, those kinds of changes were really huge. And now they're talking about tearing some of these dorms down that I remember them putting up. But I was here. Then I went on to go to school, you know, my bachelor's and then my master's. And I was here at the time that Western had almost 17,000 students. And so the dorms, it was wild in town. There were just students everywhere. Plus they all walked. You know, there were no buses. And they weren't allowed to bring cars primarily. And so they were everywhere. Now it almost seems like it's an empty campus sometimes, especially up in the old part where Simpkins and Sherman are, which I think is unfortunate because that's a beautiful section of campus. The plantings and the buildings are beautiful. But students were out all of the time. And it was a kind of a wild time. The 70s was kind of a wild time. So everything from the peach blossoms, I don't know if you've looked at or aware of it, you know, they have peach blossoms now, but the original peach blossoms were all vets. And they would carry their plungers, and there was alcohol in them as they would march in parades and things like that, you know. So it was crazy. I mean, it cracks me up when people talk about the drinking problem we have now, and they haven't seen anything in comparison to what it used to be like.
That's just, like, you've really gotten to watch this, like,
it's been amazing.
Campus evolve.
And I left. I was gone from 88 to 2006, and came back actually to see a lot of deterioration in comparison to the way that things had been when I left here, because you know, I can remember when this space and where Curran's and whatever those dorms down there were was the golf course. It used to be the golf course, you know. So we used to go sledding on a hill that is back there now. So it's just really, but universities would do that, you know. So I mean, that was a good thing, but it was a big change. So.
That is, it's like, has changed a lot.
Well, and originally when we lived on Charles Street, no matter which way I went home, we only had two houses here. It was always walking across campus and by students and either the sorority that I can't remember what that big white one on Murray Street is, you know, or you know, by private housing for students and things like that. And then we actually, my dad rented to students in a place next to where we lived on Charles Street. And he was a coach, and so we always had college students around our house. You know, they were almost like part of the family in some cases, for a period of time when that was more typical. It doesn't happen.
So you were like always around them, just like when you were in the lab school. Wasn't anything
It's
for
probably
people.
Contributed to me being so cheeky because, you know, you had to hold your own with joking college students. And of course they always gave us a hard time. You know, because, and partly because they also knew my dad, you know, so I would get I remember driver's ed, and I had college students teaching me with driver's ed at that point in time. And I remember them, I think they were football players, and I remember them saying, oh, we're going to tell your dad what a horrible driver you are, and everything. You know, and of course they were just teasing me, so you either had to hold your own, or else you know, you really cut a lot of slack.
Like always around people older than you.
And they weren't trying to be mean. You know, but it was a different kind of an experience.
So it was definitely like a good environment, you would say.
Well, besides the fact that I had a wonderful family, you know, and I consider all of my peers when I went to the lab school as being friends, and across age spans too. You know, in hindsight, I would have to say that I thought it was a wonderful place to grow up for the time.
Right.
You know, it's hard to duplicate now in this day and age. Not just because of the lab school, although that was a part of the big picture. But also just because it's different now. You know. So anyway.
But well, just kind of was like a wrap-up question. Like, what do you, if you can remember, what your like best memory of the lab school would be versus your worst memory? Like, if you were to pick, like, it might be hard if you have a lot.
Believe it or not, I can pick my worst memory, and it might be more difficult to pick a best memory. My worst memory of the lab school, and this is really kind of funny. I'm not sure. I want you to identify it with me. When I was in, it was either kindergarten or first grade. I think it was kindergarten. Okay, so it was my first year in Simpkins Hall. My sister was in third grade, and I was waiting for her after school because I had to wait for her to walk home, and had to go to the bathroom. Now, in kindergarten, we had bathrooms in our room.
Oh.
So I wasn't familiar with the bathrooms out in the hall, which are still the bathrooms in the hall, the ones with those marble things, and of course the bathrooms, you know, at both ends of the hall, you got the men's and the women's, and I still dream, believe it or not, about being in the bathroom, but this is my worst memory. So I really had to go to the restroom. Wasn't familiar with the men's and the women's bathrooms. Had been in kindergarten. Why I didn't go back in my classroom, I have no clue. But I guess kindergarten kids don't always make real good choices and things like that. So I went into the boys' restroom. Now, that wouldn't have been so bad, except I was sitting in the stall and the boys come in and find me in the bathroom. And I just remember that as being horribly humiliating and something that really was not a good experience for me. And it was all because I just didn't know, and because I didn't ask for help. You know, that kind of thing. There were other things, you know. Let me tell you one more bad one, but it's funny, too, you know, so... that beautiful stairwell going down from the second floor that I was telling you about. I was in, fourth grade. And a friend and I, a neighbor actually, she lit an M80 at the top of those stairs and handed it to me and ran. Okay. So I, of course, threw it down the stairs. Now, what would you do? I mean, you know, you aren't going to hang on to it or whatever else the case may be. And, of course, you can imagine the sound up those stairwells. It was just echoing throughout the whole building or whatever else the case may be. Well, of course they called me, you know, and I didn't want to snitch on her, so I didn't tell anybody about it. And I remember going to H. Waldo Horban's office. He was the principal. Okay. And it was on the same floor. It was on second floor. It was down at the West End again, except on the south side of the West End. It was a group of offices. And I was so, that's humiliation again. I was so humiliated. He just kept talking about how he had been watching me since I was a little girl and how he thought that I was a better person than this. And I mean, he you know, that we would have never gotten spanked. There was no corporal punishment or anything else like that. But that would have been preferable to this horrible disappointment that this bigger than life man, even at that point in time, you know, had. And actually, I can think of one other humiliating story. We were in, I was in high school that time, and we had a social science teacher, a history teacher, who of course was a coach. Surprise. I mean, you know, it's just a classic, isn't it? And his way, he was the football coach, and his way of disciplining people in the class was to make the guys do push-ups. So if you ever didn't do your homework or something else like that, girls never had to do push-ups. It was almost worse. I would have rather have been embarrassed not being able to do push-ups, because then you had to choose a guy to do your push-ups. And of course, they didn't want to do the push-ups. Oh, talk about embarrassing. And of course, it only happened to me once. I never, you know, had a problem in that class again, but that was really embarrassing too. So I'm sure there were many other embarrassing things too. Some of the memorable things were not so much personal as they were, again, school related. One was the season when I was a sophomore, and our football team was undefeated, untied, and unscored upon. You probably saw it in the sequels, because they made a big deal out of that. And that was just a really big deal for all of us. I mean, we were all really proud and everything. Another one, that same class, that happened to be my sister's class. They were absolutely hilarious. And before they graduated, they took, this was really a hoot, they took all of the chairs in the high school area and took them to the study hall. Do you know where the study hall was? It's up. There are two sets of stairs that go up into big rooms. Well, at least they used to be big. They might have divided them. But it was the one on the east side. Okay. They took all the chairs up into the study hall and chained the doors from the inside and crawled out the windows and down the outside of the school building, and never confessed. To this day, people still wonder exactly who did it. Now, I think, of course, we all think we know who did it. But that was absolutely hilarious. I've never seen teachers so upset in all of my life. It was the funniest thing in the world. That was a fun moment. And there were also, you know, lots of really, I mean, I can remember having a special love of biology because the teacher was so wonderful, and hating Spanish because I had a 10 year, but I was in Spanish from second grade through high school. You know, I could do great at reading it, but I sure couldn't speak it to save my soul. You know, still can't, you know, to this day, but I can still understand it. You know, just lots of really, really wonderful memories. So, well, I hope this was helpful.
Thank you. That was good.
If you have other stuff, you know, feel free to get a hold of me. Like I said, I'm going to be away from the office for a number of days here, but